So I'm going to provide a fairly lengthy introduction to the scriptures this morning. And I just have some notes here. Here we are. All right. Then when I'm finished the first note, I'll have to go back and go, okay, what was that? Right? Got it. I wish I had a screen back there, actually. So I was listening to a colleague of mine in the States this week, picking up a conversation about the rise and fall of civilizations. And I don't need to, you can read between the lines, right? So this is a thinking about where we are as a civilization as we face, the term that I was going to use was a climate disaster. All right, I wasn't going to use the word disaster, but I can't remember the word I was going to use. All right. So it's very interesting. About 12 years ago, when he learned that this may be the single most thing that will affect the future of the planet, as somebody who is committed to a tradition that is about creating right relationships, he thought, oh my goodness, like our relationships are all going to go south. In fact, our relationship with the planet's already gone south, which is why we're having this conversation. Anyway, so he dedicated himself as a clergy person to doing a lot of research. And so to begin with, I guess he determined, after all his reading, that there have been about 30 different civilizations throughout the history of people on the planet. And you can watch each one of these civilizations rise and fall. And we know the big ones, Greek, Roman, some of the ones in South America. Probably not familiar with all of them. And what he observed, and this is where I think this era comes into play, and this election, by the way. Oh, I know, I'm not going to talk about politics. Jesus said more about money and power than anything else, though, right? Yeah, we know that. So when civilizations are on the rise, when things are going good, right? Think post-war, for example. There's a sense of progression, and there's also a sense that that progression is never going to end, right? It's like, wow, we finally got to the 20th century. Like, women have some power. We're not beating our kids anymore. We are finally at the point where the human race should be. There's some sense that that is how we all felt about the 20th century. But, and this is all associated with economic stability, right? Suddenly it's like we're growing and we're growing and we're growing. Oh, and then there's the technological revolution that we think is going to save everything. Growing, growing, growing. And then suddenly we hit a point of no return and there's a downslide. And this is the life of every civilization. And there are signs. We may be here. And what he says is that while civilizations believe, or while communities believe that everything's good and it's going to stay that way, we adopt what he will call liberal values. All right? There's enough to go around. We can let people in our country. We can provide Medicare. And we'll all be good. But when there's signs that, there's some slippage, the story changes then from abundance, there's enough to go around, to scarcity. There is not enough to go around, and there better be enough for me. So it's kind of interesting. Let's just, so we don't have to be completely truthful about what's happening in this country, let's just use the country to the south as the example, because it's like a bright, shining example, isn't it, right? Suddenly it's like, make America great again, which really means make white, middle class people great again. But there are signs of that conversation happening in our own country. So that's point number one. All right, so that's the 21st century in North America. 1 first century Palestine. I think if you want to understand the wisdom of Jesus, we need to really understand what his context was and what he was speaking to. All right? First century Palestine, each peasant was living on about 800 calories a day. All right? And it wasn't just the 1%. We talk about the 1% here, don't we? The 1% whose wealth has just grown exponentially in the last 20 years, and the lowest 40% have lost like an exponential amount of wealth, and we're still fortunate enough to kind of be in that middle part. In Palestine, there was the 0.0001% who had a crap load of stuff, like sometimes an entire country. And then there was maybe the 8% merchant class. That's probably high. And then there was the 90% peasants. That's the 800 calories a day part. So primarily, Jesus' community was the 800 calories a day community. So they were living with a couple of things. First of all, they were living with scarcity. It was kind of scarce. On the one hand, economic scarcity. But there was another piece in play, and that is that they were also living as an occupied country. So what did that mean? That meant that the eyes of Rome were on Palestine all the time. So if Palestine and some of the Jewish leadership ever decided that they wanted to make a point about the fact that it wasn't fair, well, there was probably a soldier right at the corner who would remind them that wasn't their conversation to have. And there was a community within that community called the Zealots, right, who really did think that, if God is on our side and God is fair, we can rise against Rome and we can get our country back and we can have some fairness and some economic stability. Well, if you know your history well, you know that whenever the Zealots rose or tried to rise, they got stomped down tenfold, all right? So on any given day, there could be like 4,000 crucifixions right down the road, just to remind Palestine, this is the way it is. So, yeah, economic scarcity, true, but also you have no power to change it. That was Palestine in the first century. Point number 3. All right. So I think we understand abundance and we understand scarcity. I think we also understand, too, particularly in our climate, that we spin those stories, don't we? I mean, in first century Palestine, that would have been a hard story to spin. But you know who spun it? Jesus, right? So what was the wisdom of Jesus for the 90% living on 800 calories a day under occupation in first century Palestine? The wisdom of Jesus was this. Your abundance will be dependent on your connections. So, look out for your neighbor. Look out for the widow, the orphan, because maybe you one day. And if you can, at the end of every day, find yourself at a table with enough bread for today, that's abundance. Enough for today. And for most, that was as good as it was going to get. But, like my dad used to say, enough is a feast. Anybody else grow up with that? Enough is a feast. So ultimately, at the heart of that teaching is this. If we first commit ourselves to being in right relationships with one another, even with our enemies, we probably don't have those. But we do have people that we don't see eye to eye with. We may be sitting next to them. With the planet. We've not done that well. But if we commit to that, if we commit to the right relationships, we will have enough and more than enough we will have abundance. All right. So I'm going to read to you Bobby McFerrin's version of The Lord is My Shepherd. Because these two passages I'm going to read just basically support everything I've said, and then we'll just say a few more things. All right? At the heart of them, that is what they're about. And I've asked Tom to create a little soundtrack to go with this. I love this version. He actually, Bobby McFerrin, did put music to it. And he changed the language, so I think we get to hear it in a new way and a very powerful way. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all I need. She makes me lie down in green pastures, in meadows filled with wild flowers. Beside the still waters, she will lead. She restores my soul. She rights my wrongs. She leads me in a path of good things and fills my heart with songs. Even though I walk through a dark and dreary land, there is nothing that can shake me. She has said she won't forsake me. I'm in her hand. She sets a table before me in the presence of my foes. She anoints my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely, goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life. And I will live in her house forever. Second passage comes from John 2, 1 to 11. It is the passage about the wedding at Cana. I always bring this passage out when it's time to talk about abundance. I kind of think of this passage as the 23rd Psalm on steroids. So, the person who gave us the Gospel of John is just brilliant when it comes to metaphor and analogy. And he's all about giving us a set of glasses to see something, to create a story of abundance. And I guess what I may have failed to say, and I'll say it and then I'll say it again, is that task that Jesus gave those early peasants required of them the most profound of spiritual practice. And you understand that, don't you? We only have to look outside and go, whew, abundance. Most of us can look at our cupboards and go, yeah, enough. Way, maybe too much. But there may be times, and you will know when they are, and we may all be heading for them, when the invitation to put on those glasses of abundance will really separate those of us who are called to be metaphors for that community that has enough. There was a wedding at Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there, and Jesus and the disciples had also been invited. When they ran out of wine, since the wine provided for the wedding was all finished, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said, "Women, why are you asking me?" His mother said to the servants, "Listen, do whatever he tells you." Well, there were 6 stone water jars standing there, meant for the ablutions that are customary among the Jews. Each could hold 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them to the brim. "Draw some out now," Jesus told them, "and take it to the steward." They did this. The steward tasted the water, and it had turned into wine. Having no idea where it came from, only the servants who had drawn the water knew. The steward called the bridegroom and said, "People generally serve the best wine first and keep the cheaper sort till the guests have had plenty to drink. But you have kept the best until now." This was the first of the signs. So I've done the math for you before. 20 gallons of water times 6 big clay containers equals 120 gallons. 6 times closer to 150 gallons of wine, which translated, because we don't actually buy wine by the gallon anywhere, we buy it by the bottle. So I think what you have to imagine, and this is John's giving us a different set of glasses, 600 bottles of wine showing up at a party when everybody has already had probably enough. So what is John inviting us to see here, or inviting us to meditate on? Well, at the very basis of it all, the party will go on. And this has all kinds of social implications. The hosts will not be shamed. The guests will not be disappointed. The bride and groom will not be remembered for how embarrassing their wedding was. The party will go on. But I wonder what that means for you. Because according to John makes this the first miracle that Jesus performs. And if John makes it the first miracle, then this is supposed to be for John a super significant sign. The party will go on, the joy will go on, the fellowship will go on, the belonging will go on. Like I say, 23rd Psalm on steroids. But what else may John be trying to say about life? Well, here's what I think. When you read through the book of John, there's all kinds of material that has to do with food and table fellowship, and every meal is an invitation to an encounter with the mystery that we call God. Food is central because it's around food that we do make our connections with one another. And for John, the mystery is encountered in those connections. So life for many may be loneliness and loss. Life for some may be hopelessness and anxiety. And to this reality, our tradition provides a table. A table to remind us that the party will go on. But more than that, It's a table that reminds us that when we are in right relationship to the world around us, there will be enough for all. And it's interesting that we offer this table as a sign of our identity. It is very much in contrast to the 6 stone jars that had been filled with water. Those were huge signs of the purity requirements required by a particular understanding of the law. And it is also, I think, a sign that we're being called out of that heavy religious purity and into a community of joy and abundance. And then the community around us, and they have been known to say about us, "Are you guys still a church? You don't feel very Presbyterian to me." And so, as a community of friends who are shaped by the wisdom of Jesus, let us be clear about what we have to offer the world. A table, a celebration. A reminder that in God's household, we will be sustained. Because that which is most deep and most real and most restorative will never run out if we have eyes to see. And I think it's that simple. The 23rd Psalm, the story of water into wine, these are parables for life. They are an invitation to put on the glasses that we know is the wisdom of Jesus and to see the abundance in our midst. It is an invitation to put on those glasses and to remember that regardless of where we find ourselves, that our true home is always at the table, at the party, with everyone. And it's also a reminder of that deeper invitation that we will be further thinking of this month. And moving towards an election. That if we are committed to live in right relationship with one another, if that is our deepest calling, then regardless of what the politicians say, there will always be enough for all.